Although the German aircraft carrier Graf Zeppelin was never completed, it was launched from the slipway in December 1938. Thus a large amount of time and resources were invested, especially considering that the Graf Zeppelin was not a conversion like most early carriers from other countries. To give you some indication of the size, it had an overall length of 262 meters, whereas the Bismarck had 248 meters. Nevertheless, some people consider the Graf Zeppelin a sideshow, or a project that was neglected by the Germans. Hence two questions arise. Why was such an expensive ship constructed in the first place, and why wasn't it finished? At first, let's look at the origin of the German carrier program. Although in World War I the Germans had a strong naval air arm and a few seaplane tenders, there was no concept for a carrier. After the war, the Treaty of Versailles banned Germany from having a military aviation, thus a carrier was out of question. Nevertheless, the occupation of the Ruhr in 1923 led to the clandestine rearmament in Germany, and a significant investment was spent on the development of a basic naval air arm. Yet due to the political and financial situation, a carrier was not an option yet. Nevertheless, already in 1929 the commander of the German Navy made the first reference to a carrier. Of course, in official open documents like the building program sanctioned by the German parliament, the Reichstag, it was admitted. After Hitler gained power in 1933, the naval rearmament was substantially increased, although initially it was limited because Hitler didn't want to irritate the British. Nevertheless, the first specifications for a carrier were drawn up, with 10,000 tons and 25 to 30 planes. During this time, one major concern was the lack of experience with carriers in naval aviation, thus it was stressed to acquire information on design and operational deployment of foreign carriers. After all, Germany had experience with many other ship types, but no experience with carriers. The major lack of experience was not only on the practical but also on the theoretical side, since before 1933 there were no naval attachés in other countries. Over the course of time, the Germans gained information and/or visited carriers, like the Akagi, the HMS Furious, the HMS Courageous, and the USS Wasp. Although most information was gained from the Japanese, it was mainly on the operational and tactical side. The design was more similar to the British carriers. Although the final specifications were approved in the end of 1935 and the contract given, it took more than a year until the keel of the Graf Zeppelin was laid down in December 1936 due to the limited shipbuilding capacities. At the outbreak of the war, the machinery was installed and about 85% of the construction finished. Graf Zeppelin was still on schedule and it was likely to begin sea trials in the end of 1940, but it was never finished. The question is why? Well, for this, let's look at the operational concept and the development of the strategic situation. The initial operation role of the carrier was a defensive one for the Baltic Sea against the Polish-French alliance, yet soon this changed to a more offensive strategy, namely the threatening of the French commerce in the Atlantic. Now it is important to note that the number of German ships capable of Atlantic operations were limited. They required a longer range and also to be able to withstand the rough conditions of the Atlantic. On the operational side, ideally a carrier group would attack troop transport from North Africa to France and other forces attack merchant vessels. Additionally, carriers could also strike Atlantic ports that were out of reach of land-based aircraft, although it was quite a risky approach. The commander of the Kriegsmarine presented a concept in winter 1937-1938 that consists of a combined capital carrier group, which at its core consists of two groups with battleships and carriers to protect German supplies and attack French merchant shipping in the Atlantic, whereas the Panzerschiffe, auxiliary cruisers and submarines would operate in the Mediterranean. Yet the situation changed in May 1938 during the Sudeten crisis, when Hitler declared the British as the primary opponent. This meant a reassessment of the whole strategy. As a result, the prioritization of construction was changed in late 1938. Battleships, battlecruisers and submarines received priority over carrier production. It is important to note that carrier technology was a completely untested technology for the Germans. The US Navy, the Royal Navy and the Imperial Japanese Navy had all experimental carriers and a variety of light to heavy carriers, many of which were converted ships. Considering this, the German carrier project was a risky one. Furthermore, the Germans put quite some new and untested technology in the Graf Zeppelin. This might also have some influence on the decision to reduce its priority. The course of the war also had a major influence. The rather unsuspected early defeat of France and the invasion of Norway, both in 1940, provided the Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine with bases far closer to the North Atlantic. This also reduced the importance of long-range commerce raiders like the Graf Zeppelin, where submarines gained a substantial advantage by operating from the French coast. Additionally, a carrier was an expensive ship that required a screen of escorts, Yet during the operation against Norway, the Kriegsmarine lost a large amount of ships. This meant that the advantage of a German carrier decreased, and its deployment would have required a larger amount of the available forces in a relative sense. Furthermore, the Kriegsmarine needed more vessels and naval guns to defend the newly acquired coastline. For instance, the 15 cm guns of the Graf Zeppelin were used for coastal batteries in Norway. As so often, territorial gains usually require further investments and strain the existing resources. Another major aspect during the war emerged. The cooperation between the Kriegsmarine and Luftwaffe reached an all-time low. Göring reduced the number of planes for naval use substantially. Thus the Navy faced the situation that it might have an aircraft carrier without enough planes. Understandably, they were quite reluctant to prioritize the potentially most expensive swimming empty hangar on the planet. Now, since the Graf Zeppelin was never finished, one claim that is regularly made is that it was just a paper or side project. While this one can be debunked rather easily. Germany had 3 slipways that were adequate for capital shipbuilding. 2 of them were used for battleships and 1 for the Graf Zeppelin. Additionally, by the end of 1939, about 70 million Reichsmark were spent on the Graf Zeppelin. Furthermore, many additional investments were made. In comparison, the battleship Bismarck's construction costs were also about 70 million, although the complete costs were almost 200 million Reichsmark, because armament and fire control systems are quite expensive. If the Graf Zeppelin would have just been a sideshow, it would never have reached such an advanced stage of construction, especially considering the limits of shipbuilding capabilities, resources and lacking experience with such a vessel in Germany. So in short, the Germans constructed the Graf Zeppelin since they assumed that the combination of carriers combined with surface vessels would increase their capabilities in commerce raiding, due to the range and speed of a carrier strike force and the additional recon capabilities that would allow to direct the surface and submarine units more efficiently. Furthermore, to strike targets like the Atlantic ports that were outside of the reach of land-based aircraft. It is important to note that the initial strategy was almost exclusively aimed against the French and not the British. This changed in 1938, and after reassessment, the Kriegsmarine prioritized battleships and submarines before the outbreak of the war. During the war, the acquisition of major ports and air bases in France and Norway reduced the relative advantages of a carrier. Thus, further investments into an unproven technology with diminishing advantages would have been a waste, especially considering the problematic relationship with the Luftwaffe, which was responsible for providing the aircraft. As always, all sources are in the description, as are the links to Twitter and Reich's book. Special thanks to Justin for supporting me on this video. If you like this video, you might want also check out my video on Pearl Harbor or submarine warfare in World War I and World War II. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.